officially it's Phillipe.
Phillipe.
Or you could say P-Dog.
P-Dog. That might be better with the way things are going. Hello, Phillipe. How are you?
Life is wonderful.
Life is wonderful. Oh man, you've been such a breath of fresh air this morning. It's morning on my time. I'm in Colorado. I'm starting my day. You're ending your day. We had a little bit of tech issues this morning and you were just so awesome. I got on here and you're just full of optimism and happiness and hey, life is great, right? Life is great from that chair. Your first love was in advertising, and this led to the life of travel that you experience now. You developed a skill set and outlook that you would describe as rare in luxury travel. The 23 years spent traveling with clients informed a sense of values on which you founded the London-based travel company Brown & Hudson. Brown & Hudson crafts richer travel stories through truly one-of-a-kind experiences. And they are truly one of a kind. It's incredible. Like I was looking at your website and some of the press releases of things that you've done, and they are. The thought and the detail that you put into these experiences is incredible. You've been called a cross between therapist and investigative journalist. You are known to propose radical new ways to think about travel and the therapeutic and mind-expanding benefits it can bring. I love that. Brown brings to the luxury travel industry the disruptive force that it needs. And then this I love too, that with the forward thinking of expedition planners, the creativity of Disney, and the big thinking of Tesla, it is said he produces incomparable travel experience. That is a tall order, but
who wrote that?
How did you get into this zone of thinking differently? Because I think that's really where you show up differently in this luxury travel market, is that you are this innovator. And I love those like names that you laid down. Disney, Tesla, those are big innovators. Those are big thinkers. Those are people that like when they come to a stumbling block, they think differently. And to be in that mindset in a luxury travel space is really unique because you are pushing borders that probably aren't messed with a lot. And so I want to kind of really delve into the man behind all this magic. So let's go back to yesteryear.
Yeah, I was born in London. My mother was French. My father is English. So I had a sort of mixed heritage. And they tried various options for schooling. They started the French school. Didn't work out so well. I was fairly disruptive as a child. Not a bad child, but just kind of like a disruptive child. So then my parents said, look, let's send him to the English boarding day school run by monks, and that will really get him to just be a bit more respectable and blah, blah. And that didn't work either. So my parents threatened me. They said, look, if you don't get better grades, we're going to send you to the school down the road where the poor kids go. And I said, well, sounds great. I can walk to school. So I went there. And I had the time of my life. Prior to that, I didn't really enjoy school very much. And I was disruptive initially. Then I just had a miserable time. And then I went to this school down the road where I had an amazing time. So by nature, I've just always I've always thought differently and been a bit disruptive. And I think in my middle school age, where it was difficult, the main reason is I was coming from a French school. At a age of 11, when you come into an English school, a kid who comes from a French school is an anomaly, and they get picked on, and people make jokes about them. And so you have to find creative ways to assert yourself and to make something of that difference. Because Brits and French traditionally, stupid kids age 11, they don't react well to people in England. They don't react well to kids who come from a French school. So that caused me a certain number of difficulties. And then you've got to be creative to sort of manage those relationships and turn them into something positive, or to avoid the negatives or whatever it is. So that's been my
interesting. Okay. So you grew up in a space that you kind of had to prove yourself, and in a way to improve yourself in the way that you describe as thinking differently and being more creative. What were you also just kind of always that kid that like was in the background, like, or back of the room, like looking out the window, kind of daydreaming, or were you the kid that what kind of kid were you? Were you the class clown?
No, definitely not class clown. I was more nerdy, but unfortunately, I wasn't the Bill Gates kind of nerdy. It was like nerdy and super successful. I was sort of nerdy, probably dreaming a bit, and wishing I was anywhere other than at school, until my last school, which was great fun. And I think often you have to sort of work out where you're comfortable and why. You know, people spend a whole life trying to find out their why and their place. And for various reasons, I was trying to do that at school. And yeah, you just got to sort of survive at school. So you think of clever ways to survive. A simple example is a couple of times a year, I was Mr. Popular because I would go skiing in France. And in France, you could buy firecrackers, like massive firecrackers, like dangerous firecrackers, in any kind of tobacconist store. And I'd go skiing and I'd come back with boxes full of firecrackers. And I'd come to school and suddenly I'd become Mr. Popular because I could sell other kids firecrackers. And in England, they're only sold once a year. So they're kind of hot property. So that's just an entrepreneurial example of how you can win favor a couple of times a year.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay. So the entrepreneurial spirit was built in at a young age, definitely. You did mention like your parents said it, well, that's where the poor kids go. What was your attraction to luxurious travel? Like what kind of like income status did you come from, and why did you decide to fall into that?
Both my parents worked, and sort of middle class, nothing particularly special. I call our family kind of Euro trash because my mum was French.
Yeah.
Came to the UK to improve her English, met my father, who was a single child. His dad died when he was young. So there was kind of a cultural melting pot going on. My connection to luxury came because I spent a lot of time guiding people who were really demanding. When I first became a freelance guide, they were super demanding. And for some reason, probably because I'm a bit daft and I've got some butler kind of gene or something, the weirder and the more demanding they were, the happier I was, because I saw it as a personal challenge. And occasionally I remember certain characters who would sit at a dining table with 7 people or 8 people, and there'd be a kind of slightly toxic element who would push people's buttons. And occasionally you meet characters who had that trait. And I always found them the most interesting to spend time with, to try and work out what their thing was and manage it. So psychology, as a freelance guide, it's a big part of what you do. But I always found the weird people and demanding people who were trying to squeeze every bit of money out of their trip, in terms of value, I found those kind of very easy to deal with. And so I basically spent a lot of time guiding and being a leader or a tour guide or whatever for people like that. And I realized that if I was going to set up my own business, it would make most sense to appeal to those people. Often because in fact, I'll tell you what the example was. I once freelanced for a company in Vietnam, and I put my heart and soul into the trip. And the people were paying about $2,000 for, I think it was like 20 days. So relatively speaking, it was a very cheap trip compared to what I was used to working on. And I just did it literally because I thought, oh, well, this is going to be a different extreme of the adventurous travel realm, but I'll do this trip, no problem. And at the end of the trip, after giving it my all in my usual style, someone handed me like a $20 bill as a tip on the last evening. And it just kind of made me think, I can't control how I am, although I found it very difficult to give less. And I just gave 100% of my thinking and my energy. Someone handed me a $20 bill, which for me was very surprising. And I just got humble. I realized that it was probably a very big deal for this person to be on the trip and even to give me a tip. So I was just grateful for that. But it did make me realize that if you've got a limited lifetime and you've got a limited number of hours to devote to people, to give to other people, I preferred to give it to people who could, who would value my physical work if I was being a guide, or my thinking if I was designing a trip for them, or creativity. And so, you know, you can hang out, spend your life looking after students, or people who have small budget, or you can hang out with people whose ability to invest is commensurate to your ideas. So if you have crazy ideas, it's better to work with people who can bring those to life. I'm not a luxury kind of a person. If I think about my friends, they're mostly artists, creative types, fun types.
Yeah.
I don't have sort of milieu that I network with and they all drive Bentleys.
Yeah.
The closest I get to a personal interest in luxury is I have a love of finely crafted things, or people who have developed an incredible sense of craft, whatever it is they do. Whether it's making a car or making, I don't know, even the sort of values that go into an iPhone, you know, the design, the big thinking, all of that hard craft and that exquisite detail drives me wild. So
I love that. I love that. I just want to reference some of your trips that you've planned, just so that we have an idea of this creativity that you bring to the table. Strolling through a renowned art collection with the curator who put it together, chatting over drinks with the architect who designed the museum, meeting a writer, a director, a politician whom you've always admired, or a monk who hasn't left his temple since the day you were born, filming a lioness and her cubs with an award-winning videographer, or putting a mountain bike into a helicopter and flying into an unexplored valley.
Yeah, I mean, the things that you listed, meeting Desmond Tutu, hanging out with Schwarzenegger, all of that for us is not actually that special at all.
Okay.
A lot of people can do that kind of thing.
You do the dirty work. Like, you do the hard work in like investigating what it is that they're trying to find. You like utilizing psychologists, scientific data, like you do that for them, as opposed to them being like, this is.
Yeah, because for me, it just makes sense. It's like going to an architect and saying, build me a house.
Yeah.
They're going to ask you some questions to build the right house. And we're doing the same thing. And when people are spending the kind of money that often they spend, you could actually build a house with some of their investments on their holiday. So it behooves us to ask the right questions, to start from the right foundation, and you know, to think before, to think during the travel, to think after the travel, to teach them. Because I've looked at thousands of competitors' itineraries, and I look at these things and I think, how many travel companies have ever taught me anything about traveling or about me as a traveler? They haven't. They've bought me a ticket, I've gone on a plane, I've seen some stuff, and I've come back, possibly transformed, maybe not, I don't know. And no one's bothered to teach me or to say, hey, Phillipe, had you thought about how valuable the anticipation phase is before you leave? That's why I like what the TTC is doing. That's part of their story. And the framework of the hero's journey is fabulous as well. But no one's ever approached me with that kind of mentality. But it's what we do with our clients, because if we're not teaching them something, then we're no better than anyone else there.
That's a huge responsibility that you have. And it sounds like you do an incredible job as being as meticulous as you are but that isn't an easy task to find out what somebody wants and what their bigger why. That is no easy undertaking, especially in the space of luxe travel. So how do you ensure that like you stay into something that is rooted, something that is real, and you don't get like sidetracked? Because I feel like it could be so easy in that space to be like, to get sidetracked from the greater truth, from like the greater good, or a more expansive, like real change, right? And so how do you stay rooted to, because as you said, you are dealing with people who can make the most change?
Our values are subservient to our client. So we have a sense of how to approach any particular client problem. And so whoever calls, they're calling because they've got a problem, or they had a problem with a previous company. And it's our job to understand what that problem is and to come up with ideas that might solve it. But in terms of how we do it, we just remember that people tend to travel because they're lacking something where they are. So it's a sort of rebalancing theory. And then it's just really focusing on them. And our deal is subservient to their story, effectively. So we don't impose anything. We wouldn't seek to, it may be that a client on one particular trip literally just wants the lowest common denominator. They just want sun, and they don't want anything more than that. And so we respect that. So in some situations, it's not very profound what we do, but that's because that's what the client needs. They just need simple, quick, and easy. And obviously in that itinerary, we might put a paragraph in about the value of stopping at a lay-by, looking down a valley, so that you can be exposed to that feeling of awe. And we might write a few words about awe, awesome, and just remind young kids, perhaps, if they're involved, everyone's saying, awesome. Well, what actually does awe feel like? And why is it important? And how can it change you physically? So our shtick is subservient to our clients' needs, but generally we try and teach something to anyone who's traveling anywhere, before they leave, whilst they're traveling, when they come back, and then before their next trip, during that trip, and when they come back, in a cyclical way. Because if they've got a trip to look forward to, then they're in a constant virtuous cycle.
And where are these greater truths coming that you're teaching them?
Psychology, mostly. I mean, if you just think about well-being, happiness, flow, the effect that novelty can have on someone, it's pretty much psychology. And our thinking has evolved over the years from, at the beginning of the company, it was just about bespoke, like being super, super detail-orientated, which is the original meaning of bespoke. It's made for one person, only one person. And then we evolved into stories, because ultimately people travel so that they can come back with stories of their own transformation or just stuff they've done. And recently we realized that the most interesting thing that our clients have experienced in working with us is just being aware of different psychological principles with the associated research paper. And so it's traveling with a scientific basis, basically. So you can talk about, silly things, sitting in a cafe and sketching the church. By virtue of sketching, and this goes back to the 16th century, a guy called John Ruskin, if you sketch it, then that memory of that church at the end of that street in Hanoi will be way more vivid than if you just point your phone and take a picture. So, and there's some science to that act of sketching. There's science to the value of anticipation. Research has been done that shows that by traveling, you can get a certain amount of happiness. But people who travel, this is some Dutch research, people who travel are happier, but not a great deal happier than people who don't, according to their research. But what they did find was that in the anticipation phase of travel, you can generate a huge amount of happiness without having to go anywhere, pretty much. And that's a huge value add. Like the particular example that made us initially think of that was a family going to the Galapagos. And I said, look, they're calling us in December. They're traveling at Easter. What happens between now and then? Like, how do we get them into their story? These relatively young kids, how do we build an engagement? What's going to happen between now and then? So it's a night in the Natural History Museum. It's meeting Charles Darwin's great-grandson. It's working in London Zoo. And so the trip doesn't start at the airport. It starts the minute we start speaking. It might be a little email article or a funny thing that is sent, so that the journey is, and the teaching is continuous. And that then I stumbled across this Dutch research, and it just happens that anticipation is a big part of the experience.
That's so interesting. I would have never thought that.
For me, it was just being lazy, thinking, let's just ask them all the questions once. It turns out that that's really important to understand someone. The anticipation phase, we thought, well, we can't abandon these people for 5 months. Let's do some stuff. That'll be cool. You just have fun, and then it turns out that it's actually valuable. Which is kind of like my stupid disruptive nature and my contrarian way of looking at the world that I get from my dad. Like, he's very much his own guy. And I realized that having this outsider perspective, being a French kid in an English school, and in various other situations, I'm very much an outsider looking in. I always thought that made me a little bit kind of, I always saw it as a bit of a negative, being the outsider. But over the years, particularly the past 4 years, I've realized that external perspective is really valuable in talking to clients, in thinking about countries, and thinking about the change. And there was a great book by a guy called Howard Luck Gossage. And in that book, I remember a particular bit where they say, we don't quite know who invented water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't a fish. And for me, it was kind of like, oh, wow. So there is value in being an outsider looking in.
I'm so interested in what books you are reading and who you are following and what podcasts you are listening to.
Reading right now, I've just finished a book on the chef Ferran Adria.
Okay.
It's just a lovely story about his creative process, and his life, and his competitive relationships with other chefs.
What's a book that changed your life?
Well, actually, Of Mice and Men, because as a child, it was the only book that I remember sitting down and just wanting to read nonstop. There are lots of sort of self-development books that have all been helpful. Anything about advertising and marketing I always find interesting, because marketing is basically psychology and persuasion and playing, really.
Why do you think Of Mice and Men caught your attention so much?
I think it was probably because I connected with the underdog, and I think it was a character called Lenny. Was Lenny kind of like the dopey one?
Uh-huh.
And I think I've always connected with the underdog, and I always saw one of those characters as being that underdog, and so I think that just touched me in a particular way. And I thought, poor Lenny throughout it, and I just remember wanting the best for him, but obviously it didn't work out that way.
What do you think the problem was with travel before COVID, and what is it now?
People have always bought what they've always been sold in the way they've always been sold to. So if you, in a very dopey way, because I'm just not very smart, I have to look at things in generalities. Since the day...
I don't agree. I don't think that's the case. You're far too humble.
No, if you think about travel since the earliest days of the Cook's Tours to today, people have basically just been doing the same thing. Now, yeah, there's been low-cost airlines, there's been the internet, but we've all kind of been doing what people did in the 16th century, the grand tour. We go to places and we see the things we're told to see, but no one has ever explained to us why you should go to a museum. Like, do you need that? Do you need that? Like, I don't spend my weekends going to museums in London, but apparently when I travel, I should see the famous museum. So one of the things that is a problem of travel is that people don't really think about what they can get from it. because people are just sold a place, a hotel, some things to do without being told how those things are going to change them. That's pretty low level. There's no teaching going on. It's just go, see stuff, come back. Experiential and transformational, that's a massive leap in terms of thinking and discussion and debate. It's a massive leap. So people following a model that dates back to the 16th century, basically, the Grand Tour, that's all they're doing. People blindly accepting the information that a travel professional gives them without them thinking why they're traveling at all. That's a big issue. People, and that's one of the reasons I've written this book, is I want people to be more demanding of themselves, as in ask themselves the right questions before they start thinking about planning a trip. Like, why am I traveling? What do I want to get out of it? How do I want to potentially change and evolve? So people need to be tough on themselves. Partners, travel professionals sell travel like a commodity. Most people sell travel for a measly 10%, and so they want to move it on and get on to the next one. So the idea of having a brainstorm or dreaming up some crazy ideas or developing a list of really interesting questions to ask the client, people can't do that because the bulk of people are just making 10%, so they kind of need to move it on. So detailed thinking, creative thinking, transformational thinking. First of all, people aren't at that level in terms of their thinking. They're just happy to sell a ticket and a hotel. But secondly, it takes time, and time is money.
You just wrote a book. What is it called?
It's called Revisit: The New Art and Science of Luxury Travel. The problem is, I've just added 2 chapters to it. Okay. And one of them is about artificial intelligence. And I think it's a really important chapter, because in the history of travel, Cook's Tours to today, there haven't been very many big disruptions. Yeah. Airbnb was a big one. And it came from a brilliant guy who had nothing to do with travel. And so I'm kind of a bit in admiration, but my initial feeling about that is intense irritation that someone in our industry didn't think hotels are great, but what about every couch? What about every spare room? So it makes me feel that the bulk of the industry has been on holiday for the past 100 years. Someone who wasn't in travel made one of the biggest disruptions to the industry. So it's great that the TTC is a huge change from within, from a particular area of adventure travel, etc. That's a great change. But my concern, and the connection back to artificial intelligence, is that unless people up their game, travel professionals, unless people add more value, more creativity, more transformational thinking, the next thing that will break the industry will be artificial intelligence.
Wow.
And why not? I mean, we talk to Siri, we talk to Cortana, Alexa, and Fate, the big 4. Yep. They have all the data about our lives. Mm-hmm. How difficult would it be for someone to take Thailand, put all the travel content of Thailand into a system, zip lining, the hotels, means of transport, the impact that all these experiences can have on you, the hormonal flow, just dump all of that information to a system, and then have a human talk to that system, just like it talks to Alexa, and say, hey Alexa, in September, I live in New York. In September, I want to go somewhere warm, and I want to feel energized, and I want to feel this, and I want to feel this, and I don't want to fly more than 6 hours. What have you got? I just don't see that as a very big, complicated system to create, for someone to create. And the system throws out destinations, it throws out hotels. The answer, the brief.
So then how do we ensure that human, what is this, the magic of the human creativity aspect in this transformational process, and how do we ensure that stays?
I think it's very much the mission of the TTC. It's opening people's eyes to the possibilities of travel. So it's opening their eyes to the whole process of why are you traveling, how could you travel, and then where. The order's all wrong. Right now it's like, oh, where should we go? And how do we get there? It should in fact be, why are you traveling? What is the best way? How could you travel in order to get the most from it?
That's actually a concept of yours, that shifting the why to the where. No, sorry. Shifting from the where to the why.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, part of that was Simon Sinek's thinking, but it just makes sense. Like, so why are you going on holiday? Why are you traveling? That's the first most basic question. But by asking those questions and being assertive of your process and your approach, you actually end up serving your clients better. So we had a client, an Italian lady, who came to us, and she said, look, my kids are at the difficult age. They don't want to travel with us anymore. We still want to keep doing family holidays. Where should we take them? And where should we take them that's going to keep them engaged? And we said, well, tell us about kids. And she told us a bit about the kids, and we spoke to the kids directly and discovered their love was computer games. And we found out which computer games they were into. We looked at them and worked out how they worked. And we thought, the problem is quite simple. These kids love the world of computer games. And these worlds are, they're gazillions of dollars are spent creating immersive, engaging worlds that are, frankly, potentially, and definitely for these kids, more interesting than going on holiday anywhere with mum and dad. So, so the solution was simple. If that crazy world where you've got random point scoring, growth, a sense of team with these random people and people you know, if you look at why computer games are so engaging, you simply say, okay, well, it doesn't matter where you go. All we have to do is make sure that your next trip is as engaging as League of Legends or Fortnite or whatever it is. Because that's their world, and that's what blows their mind. Mum and dad, for yet another summer holiday, it's a different place, but it's the same deal. Dad does this, mum does that, we do this. So we turn it into a game, and we created a concept called the Great Game, which basically is the equivalent of a computer game. The kids had a sort of start point and an end point. In fact, the whole family did. Start point and an end point. And depending on what they did, it affected what happened the next day. So they were growing and they were learning, in a slightly sort of peripheral way.
In a way that was engaging to them. And what were they learning? Like, what was it, like family bonding? Was it expanding their world outside that video game?
For that particular family, they wanted the kids to be more extroverts and just to be more open, because they were very close. So the deal was, at home, the family had staff and they had various people that helped in the office and at home. But when they went on holiday, it was just the parents and the kids with zero staff, which presented some problems because suddenly mum and dad had to deal with the kids. And that's a lot of pressure when most of your life you're supported by other people. So they wanted the kids to be more extrovert. So we ensured that a bunch of the challenges or things that they had to do meant engaging directly with people they met. And some people were planted and some people were just regular passers-by. And basically, it was try and learn some words of the language, engage with people, try and connect and learn from them in different ways so that your perspective when you come back home is a little bit different. What else was involved? Oh yeah, I think it was, they weren't particularly adventurous in the food department because being Italian, they know they have the best food in the world. And so they had to explore the culinary delicacies of India. So that for me was hugely satisfying. You know, it was a bunch of questions and then getting that moment of insight and saying, the parents want us to choose the destination, but that's not what they need. What they need is this. And then to have to present that back to them and say, look, you know, we've thought about your situation and we think this is what you need. It's not what you've asked for, but it could transform you.
And how ideally, are they usually pretty open to that? When you say it's not what you want, but it's perhaps maybe what you need. How do they respond to that?
Most people are receptive to it, and over the years, it's taken a certain amount of time to sort of get comfortable with that being our deal, because we're super client focused. So it's very tempting to just say, oh, okay, well, if you want us to find somewhere, we'll just do that. But it's about helping people and giving value, and so sometimes you've got to stick with your vision. And if clients come to us and aren't willing to answer some questions, and there are a few of them, and if their priority is quick and easy, then on occasions we just won't work with them.
So for the rest of us, besides that 1%, and in terms of the future of travel and how we travel, what can we learn from the 1%?
What people can learn from the 1% is basically, where am I in terms of my own personal growth and development? What can I be getting from travel that will help me grow more, have a different perspective on life, have a different perspective on what is going to be the most, I guess in Joseph Campbell language, it's finding your bliss. You know, the questions they're generally asking is, am I finding my bliss right now? You know, am I in a good place? And maybe materially they are, but not in a sort of spiritual or personal growth sense, you know. If they keep asking about wilderness, it's maybe because they're a little bit denatured. You know, if they want nature, it's possibly because they're denatured.
I could talk to you forever. You're such an interesting guy. But we're going to run out of time here. So I want to ask you one more question, because you are such a disruptor and such a forward thinker. And this is basically, we need you more than we ever did in this time of pivot. And we're looking for ways to sustain a better normal. And so I want to hear your thoughts right now, what you're thinking about when you're now looking out your window and pondering the future. What's going through your head?
I want people to take this in between time to think about what their future is and ask themselves different questions. It's kind of a weird, beautiful parenthesis that we can all react to in different ways. And so whether it's travel or whether it's how you live your life, everything is just, the context has changed dramatically. So it's the perfect opportunity to reevaluate, and particularly in the travel realm, think, you know, why am I traveling at all? Could I have incredible experiences in my home, in my neighborhood, in my city?
And as a travel guide or a transformational travel facilitator, what should they be thinking in this time of pivot? Where should they be spending their attention?
Teaching people how they can get more from their really precious time traveling. I like to, in the same way that I like people to imagine that AI could be taking their jobs within 3 years. I like people to imagine they could only travel once a year or once every 2 years. If you were only able to travel once every 2 years because the pandemic continued and it became more difficult, what would you do differently? How would you think differently about that trip? It's similar to an example I brought up with some clients, and I said to them, how many travel experiences can you remember, or how many holidays can you remember from your childhood? I'd say to clients. And they'd find it really difficult. They'd say, oh, phew, you know, if I asked someone who was 18, they could barely remember any memorable childhood holidays. So I think it's worth thinking, imagining a piece of paper on which you only got Most people maximum could remember about 14 experiences from their childhood. So I say to people, imagine you've only got 14 lines on this piece of paper for those 14 opportunities to create incredible travel memories that transform you. What are you going to put on each of those lines for your, for your life as a family? And why? So imagine you've got 14 opportunities. What are you going to do? Why are you going to do it? And then where? But take a strategic view of travel and how it can affect you and change others. It's the best time of your life. It's the time when you're you just got most potential, and no one's helping us other than a few people. No one's really helping us get the best from that most precious time. It's not a hotel room. It's not a flight. It's not a package. It's not the stuff of travel. It's mostly, this stuff. So in the transformational realm, it's just keep elevating people's vision of how they could spend this time, what they could get from it, and then just spread that message. It's a great thing that TTC is doing. It's a hard thing. It's going to be a hard thing, but it's an awesome thing. So yeah, that's my rambling advice.
I like the ramble because I've noticed this from the time I got on the call with you. You do have a very grounded flow of when you meet adversity, when things don't go your way, I feel like you are the person that just immediately jumps back and it's life.
I think it's cool. It's just stupidity. The other day, in fact, Sunday, I stood outside my front door and the door slammed shut. And my girlfriend was driving off at the same time. And I was like, oh, stop. And I said, have you got the house key? She said, no, I left it inside. And I said, oh, well, it's a nice day. My dog was inside. Oh, my dog's inside. That's fine. There's nothing cooking. So the house weren't burned into flames. And I just automatically went to, I don't know why, but it's just things could be way shittier all the time. I didn't go to some retreat in Santa Fe to get like this. I just kind of think I'm lucky, and even if the door shuts on me and I have to walk across London I didn't have my phone, didn't have anything. It's like, oh well, it's a sunny day. How bad is it?
I think that's a lot of secret to your sauce right there. How do we stay connected to you?
In the simplest way, because the book's website isn't yet. There is a book's website. It's called revisittravel.com. And that just talks about what's in the book and gives you the opportunity to invite me to come and ramble more from a stage or a Zoom for a fee. Or you can just get in touch through brownandhudson.com. Brown like the colour, and the word and, Hudson like the river.com. That's the travel business. Revisit Travel is the book and the consultancy and mentorship and all that stuff. It's different.
I love it.